Probably the most disappointing year for the Miami Dolphins came in 2024. It was yet another year where we didn't see Tua Tagovailoa finish the season or miss a big chunk of the season due to injuries. Yet it still was a pretty, I guess I would classify it as a decent year from the defense. Top 10 in points allowed, top 5 in yards allowed. However, those shortcomings that came from the offense, it was a pretty bad year for Tyreek Hill. And so offensively, this team was pretty let down and missed the playoffs because of it. And I think it was pretty easy to predict that because of this disappointment that the Miami Dolphins had, they were going to lose a lot of players through free agency. Starting off with a guy who didn't sign with another team but did retire this year was Teron Armstead. And in typical free agency, the Miami Dolphins are going to be moving on without Javon Holland, Calais Campbell, Robert Jones, and Raheem Mostert as their more notable guys who left in free agency. But also there's some other guys on this list that you can see that, were solid contributors to the Miami Dolphins. And, it's probably the worst loss of Javon Holland. Seeing him move on to the New York Giants, this was a guy who you could really build your secondary around. He was a guy who could make plays in the passing game as well as against the run. He was very agile, very fast, was a very good player when it comes to playing over the top as a safety. And so, like I said already, it's just hard to lose a guy like that and be happy about it. In terms of the additions and re-signings, the Miami Dolphins actually do sign and re-sign a lot of players. I think one of the more underrated signings that they made was the wide receiver Nick Westbrook-Akine. They bring him over from Tennessee, a guy who had a career year last year in Tennessee, despite the fact that he had Will Levis and Mason Rudolph as his quarterbacks. They get guys as well like KJ Britt, James Daniels, Ashton Davis, Efetu Melifonwu, and they get Zach Wilson to be a backup quarterback. And I don't think Miami fans really want to see Zach Wilson play quarterback, but I think it's at least a better option compared to the previous years where it was, Skylar Thompson was your backup quarterback, or like last year where it was Tyler Huntley was your backup quarterback. Not that Tyler Huntley can't be a good quarterback, but I just don't think you put Tyler Huntley in that offense, it's not really going to work. He needs to be more in an offense where it's going to prioritize his running ability. I think Zach Wilson fits more as a backup quarterback with this team than Tyler Huntley did. But honestly, if you ask me, through free agency with their losses and their additions and re-signings, I don't think the Miami Dolphins really go up or down a lot. I think, as I mentioned, the loss of Javon Holland sucks, but you do... Other than Javon Holland, I don't think you lose anybody that was really that dependent on. And if you did, you replace them. I mean, you find guys in the back end to replace, like Siran Neal. You replace him with Ashton Davis. You add to your linebacker room, which I think has been, you add Jordan Brooks last year, but you supplement some other, shortcomings, I guess, that he has with somebody like KJ Britt and Willie Gay Jr., who I think, we're going to see a lot more of him than we did in New Orleans last year. So I think free agency overall, I think Miami does pretty well. I think it leads them to the draft where they have all possible, whatever they want to do, they can do. And so now to the draft, where the Miami Dolphins have 10 overall selections, with the number 13 overall pick being the obvious one. It probably has to be offensive line, if we're being honest. Like I said, Teron Armstead does retire, and that leaves you only with guys like Austin Jackson, Larry Borum, Patrick Paul, Jackson Carman, and Keon Smith. Really not a great list of guys, especially when you have somebody like Tua Tagovailoa who has injury history. You want to have somebody dependable at especially technically right tackle that is the blind side of Tua Tagovailoa as a left-handed quarterback. But you want to have a left tackle as well that can be dependable. And I don't think they have that. So with that number 13 overall pick, you think of guys like Kelvin Banks. You think of guys, if he falls somehow, or if you trade up to get him, like Will Campbell. But you also probably need to make some moves to address your playmaker spot. I think Devon Achane can be a really good running back in the NFL. I think last year he had a really good year, but there's no one else behind him. And so in the back end, like second or third, that's not really the back end, but second or third round of the draft, you add somebody that can be a little bit more of a hammer at that running back spot. I would love somebody like a Cam Scatabo, somebody like an Ollie Gordon, somebody like even a Caleb Johnson. Those would be kind of the guys I would target to be that backup. And then, honestly, going back to the first round, I know Jonnu Smith is there. I know that he had a really solid year last year. He had the best year of his career last year. But the tight end position for the Dolphins has not been very productive before Jonnu Smith. And I don't really know if it's a guarantee that Jonnu Smith is going to be as productive as he was last year even next year. And you're looking at a guy that's already 30 plus years old. You don't really want to just hitch yourself to somebody like that for the future. And his contract is also up after 2025. And the only guys on the roster at that tight end position other than Jonnu Smith are Pharaoh Brown and Julian Hill. So I think if they're in the position where they could get Tyler Warren, where I feel like, Tyler Warren might be kind of the unfortunate loser of this year's draft because he's probably a top 5, top 10 talent that could end up outside of the top 10. And if that happens, I think the Miami Dolphins would be all the better for taking a chance on a guy like that. I'm going to give the Miami Dolphins a C for this year's offseason, for this year's free agency period, I should say. Listen, nothing crazy is changing. Nothing great came in, and I think they lost probably one of the better free agents in Javon Holland that was available this year. And so with that in mind, I think they did address their backup quarterback position. That's great. I think they added some guys like KJ Britt, James Daniels, Nick Westbrook-Akine. That's good and all. But I honestly feel like the Miami Dolphins are kind of one of those teams where they're not showing it yet, but they're heading towards needing to hit a full reset button and fully rebuild their roster and their organization from the top down. And it kind of reflects on how they address this year's free agency. They didn't try to go swinging for one of the big ticket free agents. They just kind of tried to supplement around the edges of what they have. And that's fine. They might still make the playoffs this year. They might still be a 10-plus win team. I just don't think they had a really good free agency this year.